Let me start by saying this. I'm not the kind of guy who brags about money. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that success can change how people see you, even your own family. My name's Liam Carter, and I live in San Francisco, where my days are filled with coding marathons, investor pitches, and enough caffeine to keep a small army awake. I built my career from scratch after inheriting my grandma's trust fund, which gave me just enough capital to launch my tech startup. Fast forward 5 years, and here I am, still hustling, but now making more than enough to cover my expenses. And you know what I did with all that extra cash? I sent $1,000 a week to my parents back in Ohio. Every single week, no questions asked. It wasn't about showing off or proving anything. Honestly, it was guilt. See, when I moved out west of my job, I left behind Mom, Barbara, Dad, Tom, and my little sister, Emily. They stayed in our hometown, a quiet suburb called Maplewood, and while they acted like they were fine without me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I owed them something. Money became my way of staying connected, even though I rarely visited anymore. Sure, we talked on the phone sometimes, but those conversations always felt surface level, like we were skimming over the real stuff, because neither side knew how to dive deeper. Still, I thought the money would make up for it. Boy, was I wrong. Now let me tell you about my folks. My mom, Barbara, is a classic Midwestern mom type, warm, chatty, and obsessed with keeping everything just so. She retired early from teaching kindergarten, and now she spends most of her time tending to her garden, baking pies nobody eats except Dad, and organizing church bake sales. Then there's my dad, Tom, who's the opposite of Mom in almost every way. He's quiet, practical, and happiest when he's elbow deep in grease fixing up some old car he found at a junkyard. Together, they're this weird yin and yang duo that somehow works. Except lately, I've been feeling less like part of their equation and more like an ATM machine. Emily, on the other hand, is different. She's 2 years younger than me, works as a nurse in Cleveland, and visits Mom and Dad at least once a month. She calls me every Sunday night, usually to complain about how tired she is or how much drama her boyfriend brings into her life. But she also fills me in on what's happening back home, the things Mom conveniently leaves out during our awkward phone chats. According to Em, Mom and Dad aren't exactly struggling financially, but they could use a little help maintaining the house. That's why I started sending the money in the first place. At least, that's what I told myself. Deep down, though, I think I just want to feel needed again. The truth is, my relationship with my parents has always been complicated. Growing up, I was a responsible kid, the one who got straight A's, played varsity football, and never caused any trouble. But being the golden child came with its own set of pressures. By the time I graduated college, I felt like I'd spent my entire life trying to live up to their expectations. Moving to San Francisco was supposed to be my chance to break free, to figure out who I really was outside of their shadow. Instead, it created this weird distance between us. We weren't fighting or anything. We just drifted apart. Take our phone calls, for example. Mom would call every Tuesday evening, rambling on about her latest gardening project or how the neighbor's dog keeps digging holes in their yard. Meanwhile, I'd sit there nodding along, pretending to care while secretly wondering why we never talk about anything meaningful. Dad hardly said a word during these conversations, usually chiming in only to ask if I remembered to change the oil in my car. It was frustrating, sure, but I figured it didn't matter as long as I kept sending the money. After all, actions speak louder than words, right? Little did I know, my actions were speaking volumes, but not the ones I intended. One Tuesday night, Mom called me during dinner. I was scarfing down Thai takeout at my desk, scrolling through emails like usual, when her voice popped up on speakerphone. "Liam, sweetheart," she began, her tone unusually chipper. "We have some exciting news." Now, whenever Mom says exciting news, it usually means she signed up for another craft fair or bought yet another ceramic rooster for the porch. So I braced myself. "We're going to Hawaii," she blurted out. At first, I thought she meant just her and Dad. But then she explained that the whole family was going, including Emily, her husband Mark, and their 2 kids. Apparently, They'd been planning this trip for months, pooling resources and booking flights. My stomach dropped when I realized she hadn't mentioned me once. Not wanting to seem hurt, I forced a laugh and said, "That sounds amazing. How can I help?" Because, well, that's what I do. I offer to pay. Mom hesitated before saying, "Oh, don't worry about it, dear. It's already taken care of." Something about her tone made me uneasy, but I brushed it off. Maybe they really had everything under control. Or maybe they didn't want my help. Either way, I wasn't prepared for what came next. A week later, I got an email from Mom titled, "Hawaii Itinerary." Curious, I opened it and scrolled through the document. There were flight details, hotel reservations, activity schedules. It looked like the perfect vacation. Until I noticed one glaring omission. My name. My heart sank. No flight listed for me. No hotel room reserved. Nothing. Just silence where my presence should have been. I stared at the screen, stunned. Was this some kind of mistake? Did they forget to add me? Or worse, did they leave me out on purpose? I called Mom immediately. "Hey, Mom," I said, trying to sound casual. "I saw the itinerary for Hawaii. Looks great, but I didn't see my name on it." There was a long pause on the other end. Finally, she replied, "Oh, honey, we thought it might be too complicated to coordinate your schedule. You're so busy with work, and flights from San Francisco are tricky." Her voice trailed off, leaving me speechless. Too complicated? That was their excuse? I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but instead, I muttered something lame like, "Okay, well, enjoy the trip," and hung up. As soon as the call ended, I threw my phone across the room. How could they do this to me? That night, after the phone call with Mom, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying her words. Too complicated. You're so busy. Flights are tricky. It felt like a slap in the face. How could they justify excluding me like that? Sure, I live across the country, but isn't that why planes exist? And let's not forget the fact that I've been sending them $1,000 a week for years. If anyone had the means to make it work, it was me. But no, instead of even trying, they just left me out. The next morning, still fuming, I made a decision. No more weekly payments. Just like that, I stopped the transfers. At first, I didn't tell anyone, not Mom, not Dad, not even Emily. Part of me thought they wouldn't even notice. After all, they'd gotten used to having that money show up automatically every week. But deep down, I hoped they'd realize something was missing and reach out. Maybe they'd apologize, explain themselves, or at least acknowledge my absence from their precious Hawaii trip. Spoiler alert, that didn't happen. Instead, life went on as usual, for them anyway. For me, everything felt heavier. Work became my escape, and I buried myself in coding projects and late-night coffee runs. About 2 weeks later, I found myself at a company happy hour. Normally, I'm not much a socializer, but this time, I needed distraction. That's when Rachel, one of my co-workers, cornered me near the snack table. Rachel's one of those people who always seems to know what's going on with everyone, even if you don't want them to. She looked at me with her sharp, knowing eyes and said, "You seem pissed off. What's eating you?" At first, I tried brushing her off with some vague comment about work stress. But Rachel wasn't having it. "Come on, Liam. Spill. You've been dragging around here like someone kicked your puppy." So I told her everything about the weekly payments, the Hawaii trip, the exclusion, the silent treatment. By the time I finished, I was practically shaking with frustration. To her credit, Rachel listened without interrupting. When I finally ran out of steam, she leaned back and said, "Okay, here's the deal. You can't keep bottling this up. Confront them. Tell them how you feel. Money might be easy to give, but relationships, those take effort from both sides." Her words hit home, but I wasn't ready to act on them yet. Still, talking to Rachel helped. For the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely alone in this mess. It had been over a month since I stopped sending the weekly payments, and honestly, not hearing a word from Mom or Dad stung more than I wanted to admit. I kept waiting for them to notice, to ask me what was going on, or at least acknowledge that something was off. But nothing. Radio silence. It felt like they didn't care, like my absence, both financially and emotionally, didn't even register. And maybe that hurt the most. Then one night, out of the blue, Emily called me. Her voice was shaky, almost panicked. "Liam, you need to talk to Mom and Dad," she said bluntly. "Their HVAC system broke down last week, and they're refusing to let me help them fix it." My stomach dropped. November in Ohio is brutal. Cold enough to freeze your bones if you don't have proper heating. "What do you mean they won't let you help?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "They say they can handle it themselves," Emily replied, her frustration clear. "But come on, Liam, you know how stubborn they are. Dad's tinkering with it, but he's not exactly Mr. Fix-It when it comes to stuff like this." Meanwhile, Mom's trying to stay warm by piling blankets everywhere, and they're practically living in the kitchen because it's the only room with a space heater. She sighed heavily. "Look, I know things between you guys are strained right now, but they're struggling, like really struggling. And I think they're too proud to admit it to me or to you." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream. This is what happens when you cut someone off. Another part of me, the bigger, guiltier part, felt sick. They were my parents, after all. No matter how angry I was, I couldn't just sit back and let them freeze. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the thought that this was their mess. Hadn't I done enough for them already? After hanging up with Emily, I couldn't focus on anything else. Work felt impossible. Every line of code I typed seemed meaningless. My mind kept drifting back to the image of Mom bundled up in blankets, shivering in their cold, broken-down house. And Dad, probably cursing under his breath as he tried and failed, to fix the furnace with duct tape and misplaced confidence. It made me angry, not at them, but at myself. Why did I care so much? Didn't they deserve this after what they'd done to me? Later that evening, I ended up texting Rachel. She was the only person who knew the full story, and for some reason, her blunt honesty made me feel grounded. "Hey," I wrote, "remember that family drama I told you about? Things just got worse." I explained the situation with the HVAC system and how Emily had reached out, pleading for me to intervene. Rachel responded almost immediately. "So what are you going to do? Keep punishing them or actually deal with the problem?" Her question hit me like a punch to the gut. I called her instead of responding via text because I needed to hear her voice. It felt less judgmental that way. When she picked up, I launched into a rant about how unfair it all was. "They excluded me, Rachel. They left me out of everything. Acted like I wasn't even part of the family anymore. And now they're sitting there freezing their butts off, acting like it's no big deal." Rachel let me vent for a solid 5 minutes before cutting in. "Okay, yeah, that sucks. But here's the thing. You're pissed because they treated you like an ATM instead of son. Fair enough. But now you're doing the same thing to them. You cut them off financially, sure. But have you actually talked to them about how you feel? Like, really talked? Or are you just waiting for them to grovel?" Her words stopped me cold. She was right. I hadn't said a word to them about how much their actions hurt me. Instead, I resorted to silent retaliation, hoping the lack of money would force them to see things my way. But all I'd done was create more distance. The next morning, I finally worked up the courage to text Mom. It wasn't eloquent or poetic, just 3 simple words. "We need to talk." I didn't expect an immediate response, but within 10 minutes, my phone buzzed. It was Mom asking if everything was okay. That's when I realized something important. Despite everything, she still cared. Maybe not in the way I wanted her to, but she cared. When we got on the phone later that afternoon, I didn't hold back. "Mom," I started, my voice tight with emotion. "Why wasn't I included in the Hawaii trip? Was it really that hard to figure out flights? Or did you just not want me there?" There was a long pause on the other end, and for a moment, I thought she might hang up. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. "Liam, sweetheart, it wasn't about logistics. We just assumed you'd say no. You're always so busy, and we didn't want to bother you." Her explanation sounded weak, even to her own ears. "But that's no excuse," she added quickly. "We should have asked. I'm sorry if we made you feel left out." I wanted to believe her apology, but skepticism bubbled up inside me. If you were sorry, why didn't you include me in the first place? Why wait until now to say something? The conversation grew heated, with both of us raising our voices. By the time we hung up, I felt raw and unsettled, but also strangely relieved. For the first time, we'd actually talked about the elephant in the room. The argument with Mom left me drained, but it also stirred something deep inside me. Anger, sure, but also sadness. As much as I wanted to stay mad at her, part of me understood where she was coming from. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was just clueless. Clueless about how much I craved their attention, how lonely I felt despite the money I sent every week, how much I longed to be more than just their financial safety net. But understanding didn't make it hurt any less. A few days later, Emily called again. "So," she began, skipping pleasantries entirely, "did you talk to Mom yet?" I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Yeah, we talked." It didn't go great. I filled her in on the details, the accusations, the tears, the shaky apologies. And by the time I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know, Liam, they're not perfect. They mess up just like everyone else. But cutting them off completely, that's not you. At least, it's not the brother I grew up with." Her words hit hard because they were true. Growing up, I'd always been a peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over when arguments broke out or when someone got their feelings hurt. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost that version of myself. Maybe it was the stress of building a career, or maybe it was the distance between us. But I'd become someone who held grudges instead of extending grace. And honestly, I didn't like this new version of me. Still, pride is a stubborn thing. Even though I knew Emily was right, I couldn't bring myself to cave completely. Not yet. Instead, I decided to visit Ohio unannounced. If Mom and Dad were too proud to ask for help, then I'd force the issue. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. Not Mom, not Dad, not even Emily. I booked a red-eye flight from San Francisco to Cleveland, rented a car at the airport, and drove straight to Maplewood. It was early Saturday morning when I pulled into their driveway, and the sight of the house hit me like a wave of nostalgia. The sagging porch steps, the chipped paint on the shutters, the ceramic rooster Mom insisted on keeping by the front door, all felt achingly familiar. But there was something different this time, something quieter, heavier. When I knocked on the door, Dad answered, looking shocked but not entirely surprised. "Liam," he said, squinting against the cold morning light, "what are you doing here?" Before I could answer, Mom appeared behind him, her face lighting up with a mix of joy and confusion. "Sweetheart," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that smelled like lavender detergent and old memories. For a brief moment, it felt like nothing had changed. But then reality came rushing back. The broken HVAC system, the unspoken tension, the fact that I hadn't spoken to them in weeks. "I need to see the furnace," I said abruptly, brushing past them into the house. They exchanged a glance but didn't argue. Dad led me down to the basement, where the ancient heating unit sat like a defeated beast, its pipes rattling ominously. He started explaining what he'd tried to do to fix it, but I wasn't really listening. All I could think about was how hard they must have been struggling without heat, and how much easier it would have been if they just asked for help. After inspecting the furnace and silently calculating how much it would cost to replace, I went upstairs to confront them properly. Mom was in the kitchen making coffee, her hands trembling slightly as she poured water into the machine. Dad leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his usual stoic expression masking whatever emotions he might have been feeling. "Why didn't you tell me about this sooner?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Mom flinched, setting the coffee pot down with a clatter. "We didn't want to bother you," she said softly. "You're always so busy. That's not an excuse." I snapped, slamming my hand on the table. Both of them jumped, startled by my outburst. "Do you have any idea how it feels to know you're willing to freeze before asking for my help? Do you realize how much it hurts to be treated like some kind of bank account instead of your son?" For a moment, no one spoke. Then Dad stepped forward, his voice gruff but steady. "Son, we messed up. Plain and simple. We thought we were doing the right thing by not leaning on you so much. Guess we were wrong." His admission caught me off guard. I'd expected defensiveness, maybe even anger, but not honesty. Mom chimed in, tears streaming down her face. "We never meant to push you away, Liam. We just didn't know how to keep you close anymore. You're so far away, and we didn't want to burden you with our problems." Her words broke something inside me, a dam holding back months, maybe years of pent-up frustration and longing. The argument ended with all three of us sitting at the kitchen table, exhausted but somehow lighter. Mom kept dabbing at her eyes with a napkin, while Dad stared into his untouched cup of coffee. I leaned back in my chair, running a hand through my hair. "Look," I said finally, "I'm not saying I forgive you completely. What you did, excluding me, acting like I don't matter unless I'm writing checks, it hurt. A lot." They nodded, too ashamed to meet my gaze. But I continued, "I also know I haven't been perfect either. I've been using money as a substitute for real connection because it was easier than actually showing up, and that's on me." Mom reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. "Can we start over?" she whispered. "Please." Her vulnerability nearly undid me. I squeezed her hand gently, nodding. "Yeah, let's try." The fragile truce we'd reached in the kitchen felt like a Band-Aid over a deep wound. It was a start, but we all knew there was more to say, more truths that needed to come out if we were ever going to truly heal. After a long pause, I took a deep breath and said, "There's something I need to understand. Why did you really leave me out of the Hawaii trip? Was it just because you thought I'd say no, or was there something else?" Mom hesitated, glancing at Dad for support. He sighed heavily, rubbing his temples like he was bracing himself for an uncomfortable conversation. Finally, Mom spoke. "It wasn't just about assuming you'd decline," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. We were afraid you wouldn't enjoy yourself. You've always been so driven, so focused on work. We didn't think you want to slow down enough to relax with us." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Afraid I wouldn't enjoy myself? That was their reasoning? I stared at her, incredulous. "You seriously thought I'd rather stay home alone than spend time with my own family?" "It wasn't that simple," Dad interjected, his tone defensive but tinged with regret. "We were scared, okay? Scared that you feel obligated to come if we invited you. Scared that you'd resent us for dragging you away from your life in San Francisco. So we convinced ourselves it was better this way, for everyone." I sat there, stunned. Their logic was flawed, sure, but it came from a place of love, or at least an attempt at protecting me. Still, their fear had led them to make decisions that only widened the gap between us. Later that afternoon, Emily arrived unexpectedly, having heard from Mom that I was in town. She walked into the house carrying 2 grocery bags filled with ingredients for lasagna, her signature peace offering. When she saw me sitting at the kitchen table with Mom and Dad, she stopped short, raising an eyebrow. Well, she said, setting the bags down. "Looks like I missed some drama." We filled her in on everything. The argument, the furnace, the painful revelations about Hawaii. And by the time we finished, she looked both exasperated and amused. "Wow," she said, shaking her head. "Y'all are ridiculous. Do you have any idea how much you mean to each other? Yet here you are, acting like strangers." She turned to me, her expression softening. "Liam, I get why you're upset, but cutting them off cold turkey, that wasn't fair to them, or to you. And as for you two," she pointed at Mom and Dad, "you can't keep treating him like he's just a paycheck. He's your son, your flesh and blood. If you want him in your lives, you need to show him, not assume he'll magically know how you feel." By the time dinner was ready, the tension in the room had shifted. Emily's lasagna worked its magic, filling the house with warmth and comfort that went beyond the food itself. As we sat around the table eating, the conversation turned lighter, reminiscing about old family vacations, sharing funny stories from work and school. For the first time in years, it felt like we were actually connecting. Before leaving the next morning, I made a proposal. "Here's the deal," I said, looking at Mom and Dad. "I'll help fix the furnace and cover whatever expenses you need moving forward. But there's a catch. No more assumptions. If you need something, ask me. If you want me to be part of something, include me, even if you think I'll say no. Deal. Mom and Dad exchanged a glance before nodding. Deal, Mom said, smiling through tears. As I drove back to the airport, I couldn't help but feel hopeful. Rebuilding our relationship wouldn't be easy. It would take effort, patience, and a lot of uncomfortable conversations. But for the first time, I believed it was possible. The next week, I hired a local HVAC technician to replace the furnace in Mom and Dad's house. It wasn't just about fixing the heating system. It was symbolic, a way of saying, I'm here now, let's start over. When the work was done, I called Mom to let her know everything was taken care of. She thanked me, her voice trembling with gratitude. But what struck me most was how she added, You didn't have to do this, Liam. Thank you for still caring about us. Her words stayed with me long after we hung up. For so long, I'd assumed they only care about my money, but maybe that assumption was as flawed as their belief that I didn't want to be part of their lives. Maybe we'd both been wrong, or at least partially blind, to each other's intentions. A few days later, I arranged for a cleaning service to come by their house every 2 weeks. It wasn't flashy or extravagant, but it was practical, a gesture meant to make their lives easier without overshadowing our newfound effort to connect emotionally. When I told them about it during one of our phone calls, Mom cried again. She does that a lot these days. And Dad simply said, Thanks, son. This means more than you know. About a month after my visit, Mom surprised me with an invitation. Not via text or email, but through an actual handwritten letter. It arrived in the mail one rainy afternoon. The envelope decorated with little sunflower stickers she probably bought from a craft store. Inside, she wrote, Dear Liam, we wanted to invite you to join us for a family gathering in Chicago next month. Emily and Mark will be there with the kids, and we thought it might be nice to spend some quality time together, just talking, laughing, and enjoying each other's company. No strings attached, no expectations, just family. Please say yes. We miss you. Love, Mom and Dad. Reading those words brought tears to my eyes, not because of the sentimentality, but because of the vulnerability behind them. They weren't demanding or assuming. They were asking, really asking. For the first time in years, I felt like they saw me, not as a provider or a distant figure, but as their son. I called Mom right away. I'll be there, I said, my voice thick with emotion. On the other end, she squealed with excitement, and I could hear Dad chuckling in the background. The trip to Chicago turned out to be exactly what we all needed. We rented a small Airbnb near Millennium Park, and for 3 days, we did nothing but eat, laugh, and explore the city together. Mom dragged us to the Art Institute for culture, she insisted, while Dad spent hours marveling at the model trains at the Museum of Science and Industry. Even Emily got into the spirit, organizing a scavenger hunt for the kids that somehow ended with everyone covered in glitter. One night, as we sat on the rooftop deck overlooking the skyline, Mom asked me about my life in San Francisco. Not the surface level stuff, how work was going or whether I liked my apartment, but real questions. Do you ever feel lonely out there? She asked softly. Her honesty caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Sometimes, I admitted, but I think I've been trying too hard to prove I don't need anyone. To you, to myself. Turns out, needing people isn't such a bad thing. Dad nodded thoughtfully. Guess none of us are as independent as we like to think, he said with a wry smile. On the flight back to San Francisco, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened over the past few months. The arguments, the hurt feelings, the slow process of rebuilding trust. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. For so long, I convinced myself that sending money was enough, that financial support could bridge the emotional gap between us. But sitting in that cramped airplane seat, staring out the window at the clouds below, I realized the truth. Love requires presence, not just provision. It wasn't just about showing up physically either. It was about being emotionally available, about listening and understanding and meeting people where they are. Money can fix a broken furnace, but it can't mend a fractured relationship. Only time, effort, and genuine connection can do that. A few weeks after returning from Chicago, I decided to take things a step further. If we were serious about rebuilding our relationship, and I believe we were, it needed to be a two-way street. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I planned a family trip. Not just any trip, though. I booked a week-long vacation to Colorado, complete with cozy cabins, hiking trails, and plenty of activities for everyone. When I told Mom and Dad about it during one of our Sunday calls, they were speechless at first. "Are you sure about this?" Mom asked hesitantly. "It sounds expensive." "It's not about the cost," I interrupted gently. "It's about spending time together, really spending time. No distractions, no excuses. Just us." Dad chimed in, his voice gruff but warm. "We'd love to come, son. Thanks for including us." The best part? I involved them in the planning process. Instead of making all the decisions myself, I asked for their input. What hikes they wanted to try, what meals sounded good, even what board games we should bring along. It was a small gesture, but it made a big difference. For the first time, they felt like active participants in our family dynamic instead of passive recipients of my generosity. The Colorado trip turned out to be everything I hoped it would be, and more. We stayed in a cluster of rustic cabins nestled in the Rocky Mountains, surrounded by towering pines and crisp autumn air. Every morning, we woke up early to watch the sunrise paint the peaks in shades of gold and pink. During the day, we hiked, laughed, and occasionally argued, because let's face it, no family trip is perfect. One evening, as we sat around a crackling campfire roasting marshmallows, Mom pulled out an old photo album she brought along. Flipping through the pages, we laughed at pictures of me as a kid, gap-toothed and grinning, covered in mud after playing in the backyard. There were also photos of Emily's wedding, Dad tinkering with his beloved cars, and Mom standing proudly beside her prized garden roses. "This is why we're doing this," I said quietly, gesturing to the album, "because memories matter, and I don't want to miss out on creating new ones with you guys." Mom reached over and squeezed my hand. "You won't," she promised. After we returned home, I received a package in the mail from Mom. Inside was another handwritten letter, this one tucked inside a framed photo of the five of us taken during the Colorado trip. In the picture, we were all smiling, genuine, unguarded smiles that reflected the joy of simply being together. Her note read, "Dear Liam, thank you for giving us a second chance, for seeing past our mistakes and choosing forgive. Thank you for reminding us that family isn't about perfection. It's about showing up even when it's hard. Most of all, thank you for being our son. We're so proud of the man you've become. With all our love, Mom and Dad." I hung the photo on my apartment wall, right above my desk where I could see it every day. It served as a reminder of how far we'd come and how much farther we still had to go. Months later, life had settled into a new rhythm. Our weekly phone calls became less awkward and more meaningful. Mom stopped rambling about random details and started asking questions about my life. Not just work, but hobbies, friends, dreams. Dad, ever the man of few words, began sharing stories from his childhood, giving me glimpses into a side of him I'd never known before. Emily joked that I was turning into a family guy, which made me laugh, but deep down, I knew she was right. I wasn't just investing money anymore. I was investing time, energy, and emotion, and it was paying off in ways I couldn't have imagined. One evening, as I video called him from my apartment, Mom mentioned casually, "You know, Liam, you should come visit again soon. Your room's always ready for you." "Maybe I will," I replied, smiling. As we ended the call, I leaned back in my chair, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. Money might have been a thread that initially tied us together, but love, that messy, imperfect, resilient kind of love, was what kept us connected. And sometimes that's enough.